Hello? Hello? Hola? Can you hear me? You ready? All right. Good morning, BSides. How's it going? I'm really excited to be here. This is my second BSides Baltimore, first time presenting, so really happy. Today I'm going to be talking about embracing the red and how we as blue teamers can leverage offensive skill set, adversary, offensive knowledge to enhance our detection programs. So that's kind of like the whole goal of the talk. I'm going to talk about the benefits, so the blue team-led adversary simulations, and also going to be releasing a tool today that hopefully can help you simulate certain attack patterns on your network so you can test your own detection programs. I'm going to start with a real quick one, kind of like to break the ice. How many red teamers do we have on the audience? Can you raise your hand? Okay, how many blue teamers? You're defending companies. Okay, and who are purple teamers? Who considers? Oh, there you go. Okay, I consider myself a purple teamer as well. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start. Just real quick, a little bit about me. My name is Mauricio. I'm originally from Peru. Has anyone been to Peru? Couple of hands we have, nice. That's a picture of my home city. We have a big volcano in the background. Although with global warming, it doesn't look like that anymore. I currently lead the threat management team, the blue team at financial services in New York. I used to be a pen tester. That's my Twitter account, and I always love to come to conferences and connect. And so, come say hi if you see me around. In the past couple of years, I've been doing sharing some of my work around threat hunting and threat detection on a few conferences. So you can find me out there. But let's just go ahead and start with our important piece. I want to start first talking about a little bit of how we're leveraging offensive skill set, offensive mindset to enhance our program, security program, right? If you think about it, we've been using things like vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, red teaming, and these are great, right? And the goal of these engagements, assessments, however you want to call them, is to identify weaknesses, identify attack vectors before attackers do, right? And then you close them and you are preventing attacks. So these type of assessments are helping us prevent attacks, which is great, and we need to continue doing them, and I encourage you. But in the first few years, well, actually 4 or 5 years, I think, we've been seeing a new trend on how to use offensive skill sets, and that is in the form of what people are calling adversary simulation or purple teaming, right? And this is kind of what the talk is all about, purple teaming. So what is this? Purple team is a coordinated effort between a blue team and a red team with one common goal. And the goal is to identify gaps in visibility and detection capabilities, right? So unlike kind of like the first bucket of services that we saw that focus on prevention, I feel purple teaming focus a lot on detection and enhancing your detection programs. Purple teaming, adversary simulation, it's a highly collaborative exercise where blue and red are sitting down together, working together, going through techniques, simulating them, sharing notes, sharing knowledge in general, right? And I feel like this benefits both blue and red, because the blue team is able to understand how an attack looks like, how can you actually simulate it, replicate it, and then with that knowledge, you can go ahead and try to detect it, right? But the red team also benefits because now the red team knows what are the capabilities of a blue team, so you can start thinking of ways of bypassing that. So it makes us both stronger. So back to our experience, we started doing purple team engagements maybe 3 or 4 years ago at the company I work for. And after the first exercise, we learned the benefits right away. It was really good. After the 2-week on-site with consultants, we had a good idea what are the gaps in our visibility in general in the detection program. So we wanted to keep doing it, right? And we have. But I feel there's one challenge with this type of assessment, and the challenge is that we cannot do enough of them. And why is that? Is because we usually need a red team, so we need to go out and hire consultants to do this, right? And we can only do this 2 or 3 times a year. And I'm sure other companies, only get to do this once, or maybe you don't have the budget for it, right? And this is kind of the main goal of my talk, which is we as blue teamers, I feel that we need to embrace the red. We need to go out and learn these techniques so we can simulate them against our environments. And that doesn't mean that we're going to become red teamers or we're going to become pen testers. We don't have to. We don't need to know as much as a real red teamer, or like a professional red teamer, if you want to call it, to simulate some of these techniques. So that's the main takeaway. Embrace the red. Okay. So having done this for a few years now, we kind of have a methodology that we follow, and I want to share with you guys so you can do your own purple teaming on the organizations. So first step is to identify the technique of interest, right? So you need to identify what you want to simulate, right? And this could come from different sources. Probably the best source right now is the Attack MITRE framework, right? You can go out there, navigate, and just go out through all the techniques and pick the ones that are more relevant for you, the ones that you care about. But this could also come, maybe in a tweet. Maybe a researcher finds a new way of doing lateral movement, so you may want to try it, right? Or a report from a threat actor that is doing something interesting. Once you identify a technique, you're going to go ahead and simulate the scenario. And I think this is the most important piece of a purple team exercise. The scenario means you're going to research the technique, you're going to identify how you're going to simulate it, like maybe there are tools out there that you can use to simulate it, maybe you have to write your own, right? And this is kind of essentially how you're going to simulate it. Are you going to simulate it from a rogue device on your network? Are you going to simulate it from an actual domain computer? How are you going to do that, right? So you define all that, then you go ahead and execute the test, right? So here's the next thing, the interesting thing. In an ideal world, when you execute this test, certain logs are going to get generated, and ideally, they're going to be centralized in a central location like a SIM, right? If you don't have these logs in a central location, you cannot detect it, right? You may be able to investigate it from an incident response perspective, but you're not going to do real-time monitoring on this. So that's kind of where it takes us on this. On the next step of the workflow, do I have centralized telemetry for this technique? Because if I don't, I need to go back and fix that, right? And this could come in many ways. For example, you may not be logging certain event log, and you need to turn that on. Or maybe you're logging it, but your event pipeline is broken and the event is not getting sent to your central location. So you may have to fix that, right? So once you fix that, once you have that log in a central location, you go back and execute the test once again. So we execute the test once again, now that we have the logs, and now we go through this branch. Now we have the logs on our central location. The next question is, did a detection trigger, right? And if you're doing this for the first time, you may not have a detection for it, right? So this is when you go ahead and develop the detection, the simulation, the detection. So you have a log that is bad, and then you have logs that are legitimate, like a baseline from your users, and you try to create a rule that is going to detect it with a minimum number of false positives, right? So now you have a detection. You go back, and here's what it gets interesting. You may say, okay, I already have a detection for this technique. I'm going to go to the right side and say, finish, I'm done. I don't recommend you to do that, actually. I think you should go back and execute the same technique in a different way, because that way you're going to test the resilience of your detection. And this is really important. I feel that if we simulate the same TTP under different scenarios, we're going to test the resiliency, because the different scenarios will create different logs, and your detection logic may not work for all of them. A quick example is a curve roasting attack, right? I'm not going to go deep in what a curve roasting attack is, but essentially it allows an attacker to escalate privileges on an Active Directory network by getting the hash of a service account, potentially cracking it, right? So if you want to purple team this technique, you'll go out, research it, and find that there's a few ways you can replicate it. So let's say you find these first two tools that I mentioned here, invoke curve roast and get users SPNs from inpacket. The first one is for power exploit, the second one for inpacket. So you execute this in your environment, and this looks really interesting, because the way these tools work is that they're going to basically get a service ticket for all the service accounts that have an SPN related to them, service principal name. And this looks really anomalous on the logs, because all of a sudden you're going to see one user requesting for 300 service tickets, or however many accounts that you have with an SPN associated. So this is really easy to catch. All you have to do is create a rule that looks for event 4769 service ticket requested, and look for a threshold, right? And that's it. So you're done. So you may say at this point, okay, I have a detection for Kerberos hosting, I'm done. Hold on a minute. What if an attacker is, a little bit more stealthy? What if instead of just trying to get a service ticket for all those accounts, they do some enumeration, use something like PowerView or SharpView to figure out what are all the accounts with SPNs, and not try to grab a ticket for all of them, but maybe just pick one, and you can use the tool Rubius to grab a Kerberos ticket for just one of them. Your detection is not going to detect this, right? So that's kind of the whole point. If you are not simulating the same technique under different scenarios, your detection is, mediocre, basically. So now I want to get to the main piece of the talk. So I'm going to do an exercise of simulating password spraying. Okay. So password spraying is a really effective technique that allows you to iterate a bunch of users with one password. I have a lot of red team friends, and they love this technique. It always gets them in, right? So we're going to do a simulation for this type of attack. So we're going to go for our first exercise. We're going to say, all right, the scenario is that an adversary has obtained physical access to your network, so they are now connected to your network with a rogue device, all right? So we're going to validate one password across all your domain users against a domain controller using NTLM authentication. So the tools that we're going to use is LDAP search to help us perform LDAP queries, and then Medusa, which is like a, I don't know how many year old tool this is, but it's been around. So first thing you do is you're going to do a few LDAP searches to get a list of domain controllers, and then randomly pick one, make sure it's alive, then run another LDAP search to get a list of users. Then once you have those, then you're going to run Medusa with just these parameters, and that's going to generate a spray attack. Once we go to the next step of the purple team exercise, we go to the assessment, and we find out that, yeah, our domain controllers are logging failed account logon events, 4625, and we actually have a detection for this attack, which is kind of, the rule looks like this. It's basically looking for 4625 event, logon type 3, which means a network connection, so remote connection, and you're grouping by the IP address, the client address, and then you just put a threshold. You could put 3 or 5 or 10, however you want, right? So that's good. First exercise, we learned that we have some detections for password spraying. That's awesome. Let's move on to a different iteration of the same attack. In this case, we're going to simulate an adversary that controls a compromised host on our network. So no longer a rogue device in our network, but an actual domain computer which has been infected by a phish. So we're going to validate slightly different. We're going to validate 50 domain users against one domain computer, no longer a domain controller, using Kerberos this time, not NTLM. So, and the tool that we're going to use is just leaving off the LAN, command line and PowerShell. So the first command, net user, is going to give us the list of users. Second command, net group, is going to give us the list of computers. Then we manually have to, go into this list, pick 50 users, go into the list of computers, pick one computer, make sure it's alive. And then you run a tool like, there's a lot of them out there, PowerShell, that can do password spraying. I wrote one called invoke SMB login, really simple. And you can spray it. All right, we go to the next step. Simulation is done. Let's go to the assessment. We find out that our domain controllers are not logging Kerberos events. So you cannot see this attack, basically. If you had domain controller Kerberos events logging, you would see the 4771 Kerberos ticket requested failed. So now now we learn that we need to enable Kerberos logging. So one first achievement, we know that we have a visibility in our detection, in our monitoring, all right? So the next iteration, it becomes even more interesting. What if, once again, just like the one before, an adversary controls a compromised host in the network, but this time we're going to validate one password on 20 domain users against 20 domain computers. So we're going to do kind of like a distributed spray where you're sending one authentication attempt per computer instead of all of them against one, right? To make it more stealthy. On top of that, we're actually going to add like a sleep time, 5 seconds between each of them, right? So this is, definitely the same technique, but more sophisticated, more stealthy. So the assessment is, we find out that our member endpoints in the domain are not, the events are not being centralized. So you do have logging enabled, you have your right GPOs enabling the logs, but all the logs are, scattered in each computer, and they're not central. So you have a gap in visibility. Another thing that you find is that your existing detection analytics, the one we saw, on the first exercise, does not contemplate a sleep time. So even if you had the logs, you wouldn't be able to detect this because the sleep time just breaks it. So now you find two other things about your detection program, right? So what if you keep doing this, right? And keep changing things, like instead of using domain accounts, you use local accounts because that looks different on the logs. Instead of using Kerberos, you use NTLM. So all these variations, right? So after doing this 2 or 3 times with third-party consultants and us internally, we quickly learned that there were a lot of manual steps of grabbing a list, copying, making sure a host is alive. So I said to myself, I can probably automate some of this. And a few months ago, I started writing something that I want to release today. And I call it Purple Spray. Purple team and password spraying, Purple Spray. So all right, I'm going to explain what Purple Spray is. Password Spray is an adversary simulation tool that will help you execute password spray behavior within different scenarios. Like basically all the ones that I discussed, Purple Spray supports. Focus on Windows enterprise environments. It's going to help you in 3 things: identify gaps in visibility, test your detection resiliency, and maybe helping you create new detection analytics that you didn't have before. Right now it has 2 modules, and they both target SMB as the protocol for the spray. So just real quick, I already talked about this, but what are the supported scenarios for Purple Spray? First thing is that we can simulate a rogue device on our network or a compromised host. And this is kind of like what the 2 modules that are rogue give me. And I'll explain a little bit that in a little bit. But again, that looks different on the logs. If you have someone connected like a Linux computer in your environment, non-domain joined, it's going to look different from your domain computer generating the attack. It can target random users, so I do LDAP queries and bring down random users and target them. And to minimize the risk of locking any user out, there's this cool AD attribute called bad password count that basically defines how close you are to a lockout. So I just query based on that, and now I'm never going to lock out a user, so it's safe. I can target different roles and random hosts on the environment. So for example, I can target a randomly picked domain computer or a randomly picked domain controller or several randomly picked domain computers. And why do I do this? This is interesting. When you're doing a Purple Team assessment, you're probably hitting your main domain controller and you're checking, all right, I have detection. But what if an attacker is actually pointing to that server you have in a cabinet in Asia where you have a read-only domain controller, and that domain controller is not logging events because GPO broke or there's a firewall rule blocking the events. So by randomly picking hosts for your sprays, you're making sure that your system, your security monitoring program is actually effective, right? So that's why I do that, and Purple Spray does it automatically for you. It can spray domain accounts or local accounts because that looks different on the logs. If you authenticate with a local account, it's going to leave a new type of event, 4776, validated credentials, I forgot the name. And why is this interesting? Because red teamers love when you have a local administrator account password across all your computers, right? So if you're looking for local account authentication, you may find an attacker trying to do that. It can support Kerberos or NTLM. That looks different on the logs also. It can also sleep between each authentication event, kind of like what we went over on exercise 3, right? So all these possible scenarios, the tool supports natively, and you don't have to just pick and choose and grab notepads and copy and paste the way we used to do Purple Spray. Purple teaming on password spraying. So if you think of any other scenarios, let me know, because I want to implement them. And now we go to the demo. So we have 10 minutes for the demo. Okay, that's good. All right, so the first module is in-packet spray. And I call it in-packet spray because it uses the in-packet library, an amazing library that implements Microsoft protocols to do authentication events. This will simulate an adversary leveraging a rogue device. So this would simulate an attacker breaking into your network, connecting a computer, or maybe getting access to a VPN through a bad username and password, and now they have access to your network through a VPN, right? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and show you the demo. I have a video because I don't want to challenge the demo gods. And there you go. Okay, here's Pulper Spray. So I have a domain environment with 10 VMs just to simulate a real environment, as you can see here. And I'm going to run Purple Spray, which is kind of, if you've used Metasploit or Empire, it's just identical. It has like a CLI menu. It has 2 modules right now. I'm going to use the module, and I'm going to show options. All right, what are the options that I need? First, it needs information to be able to query LDAP, right? So username, password, domain controller, domain, right? Then it's going to have, it has a field called domain users, and you can set true or false. This variable is going to define if Purple Spray is going to go and query LDAP for actually getting legitimate domain users, or if not, it's going to generate fake accounts, like just random local accounts. So random strings that are going to be treated as local accounts on the host. It has the actual password spray that you're going to use, and here's the interesting piece. It has this variable called type, and I support 3 types right now. Type 0 is you're going to randomly pick a domain controller and spray it. Type 1 is I'm going to randomly pick the domain computer and spray it. And type 2 is I'm going to randomly pick more than several domain computers and spray them in a distributed way, 1 authentication attempt per computer, right? So that's kind of what the options are. So I'm just going to quickly run it. Let me see, is this running? Yeah. Okay, so if the video helps me here, I'm just going to set some variables, to authenticate to LDAP, set username, set domain, set IP, the domain controller IP address, and I'm just going to hit run. So you just quickly show options. We run it, and here's what it does, right? It goes against LDAP, gets a list of domain controllers, picks one randomly, goes against LDAP, get a list of users, and then once again, picks them randomly and sprays them against that domain controller, right? And you can get like whether it was a valid authentication event or not, successful. And then I can go to the logs of my domain controller, refresh, and I'm going to see the 4625 there, right? There you go. You can see them, right? So now what I used to do before, it was like a new simulation. I would have to, use different tools, go to the notepad and, copy paste things. If I want to run a different simulation, all I have to do now is just set a different type. And so now I do set type 1, which is going to pick a randomly picked domain computer. I'm going to set the users to 5 because I only want to spray 5 users. I'm going to set domain users to false because I want to generate, randomly generate accounts. And I'm going to hit run. And you'll see it, this time it targeted my Windows 2008-1 with these accounts that are random. If I run it again, you see it against hitting the Windows 10-2, right? So it's randomly picking different hosts to spray, all right? And if I go to the logs, here's the interesting piece, right? You see on the logs of this Windows 10 computer that it generated failed authentication events, 4625, but it also generated 4776, which defines when someone is trying to use the local account, right? So again, this is the value of adversary simulation, right? You're learning how attacks look like in your logs, and you can create correlation rules for them, right? And you're enhancing your detection, once again. All right, and the last one, the most sophisticated one, we're going to use set type 2. In this case, remember, I'm going to randomly pick more than one computer and spray for 1 user per computer, so we're distributing the attack across several computers. And this is going to look really interesting on the logs and probably defeat some detection. So I run it, same LDAP queries, and as you can see now, I hit it Windows 10-1-2, Windows 7, so spread it. Now, even more interesting, I'm going to set a sleep time. And I'm going to sleep 3 seconds between each authentication attempt. I run it again, and now, once again, distributed spray, waiting 3 seconds per authentication event. So this looks different on the logs. Once again, you're going to confirm if your detection is working for this type of a scenario, right? So that's demo number 1, and I have 5 minutes, so it's good. Demo number 2. I have another module called Empire Spray. This simulates an adversary with control of a compromised domain host. And the way it works is, I wanted to simulate a a hacked computer performing spraying attacks, but I didn't want to write my own command and control, payload or server. So I used PowerShell Empire, which has a great API, and I can just use it. So what this does is basically you infect a computer with PowerShell Empire, and Purple Spray talks to the PowerShell Empire API and just instructs this agent to perform simulation. So you can actually simulate one infected computer on your network doing spray attacks, right? Okay, so we're gonna go to demo number 2, and I don't know. Okay, there you go. Okay, so I'm going to, first of all, this module has one difference on the main options, which is it has a use Kerberos field, because with PowerShell Empire, I can choose to use Kerberos or NTLM just by using hostname or IP address, right? Really simple, but they do generate different logs. So that's one difference. The other difference, of course, is that I need to set other type of options to define where my Empire server is, the username, the password, the port. So you have this on the advanced options. Now, my tool also allows you to automatically infect a computer with a PowerShell Empire module using WMI execution, remotely WMI execution. In this case, I'm going to use a different way of getting one agent. So I'm going to stand up our Empire server on my other tab. There you go. I just stand it up, Empire --rest with the password. Empire is going to instantiate. It's going to listen on that port, and now I'm ready. So what I need to do is on Purple Spray, I need to configure, the information of the PowerShell Empire server, and I'm just going to hit initialize, and it's going to connect to it. It's first going to check if there's any listeners. If there's not, it's going to start one, and then it's going to check if there's any existing agents, like any existing compromised host checking in. If one exists, it's just going to use that for the sprays. But if it doesn't exist, it's going to complain and say, hey, I need an agent. So there's a few ways that you can get an agent, but I also added this simple feature that allows you to get a few stagers. So all I have to do is execute the command stagers. That's going to go out against PowerShell Empire to get the standard, like BBS, HTA stagers. It's going to write them to a folder, and if I do an ls, I have them here, right? So now all I have to do is serve them in a web server. Have a victim go, we're simulating, we're going to assume that a victim is going to click on a link and get compromised, right? We have to assume compromise. So in this case, I'm going to replicate that initial compromise, and I get an Empire shell. Let me just fast forward. I get an Empire shell, and so Empire now has an active agent. So I'm going to go back to Purple Spray and to my tool and run initialize once again. And if I hit initialize, now it's going to find that agent checking in, and it's going to use it for the spray. So now we're at a point where we have an active agent checking in to PowerShell Empire, and I'm going to use that agent to spray. So once again, it's just similar like we did before in the first demo. I'm just going to play around with the options here. I'm going to set Kerberos to false, so I use NTLM. I'm going to run. This time, instead of my Kali Linux performing the authentication events, it's just going to instruct, hey, agent, run this PowerShell module. And it's the same power. When I wrote this, I didn't find a PowerShell Empire module that was doing what I wanted to do. So that's why I wrote SMB login, and then I wrote a PowerShell Empire module for it, which is really simple. But anyway, it's working. So you can see on the PowerShell Empire screen, you would see this, but you don't have to because everything's from Purple Spray, right? So, you can play around with the options once again, but, you can do the same scenarios I was doing before, but in this case, the attacks are all going to come from what domain joined compromised computer, right? So I only have a few more minutes. I'm just going to fast forward. All these videos are going to be out on YouTube also, as part of the GitHub page. But just to sum up, there's a few things that I want to do next. Like I want to support other protocols, like Exchange Web Services, HTTP or HTTP over NTLM or HTTP to be able to target things like ADFS or Link or Skype. I want to add some reporting. But if you have any ideas, if you have any ideas for any other type of scenarios, let me know, because I'm looking for them. And I just want to say a few acknowledgments. This project wouldn't be possible without these awesome projects. So thank you, community, for releasing these things and helping me build this. And I just want to final out by saying happy purple teaming. And I'm going to be making this repo public in the next 5 minutes so you can download it and play with it. And that is it for me. I don't know if we have time for questions. Thank you for coming.